this is a clear case of cultural lag on the part of my colleagues. I don't always believe that. I have friends, liberal friends, who believe as a matter of faith that the public is always ahead of the politicians. I wish that were the case. It isn't always the case. On this issue it is. I think the persistence in an overly punitive approach to drug use is an example of this. I think the public understands that much of what we are doing in trying to discourage drug use, which I think in many cases we should do, is counterproductive. It is racially discriminatory. It does a great deal of harm to society. The treatment of marijuana is a particular example of this. If you were to draw up a list of harmful substances that people use, marijuana is treated far more harshly than a number of other substances that do far more damage to individuals and that do far more damage to society. And I think that's actually well, only because marijuana has been seen throughout our recent history as the drug of choice of the counterculture. Whether it was jazz musicians, particularly jazz musicians who were not sufficiently respectful of racial bars back in the 20s and 30s, or people in the 60s who were anti-war, and on through today. And the result is a set of laws that are unfair and that I think clearly reflect this old attitude. And I talked to many of my colleagues personally, and they would say, well, yeah, you're right, but they are afraid of the political consequences. That's a paradox, because what we've seen is the number of states that have passed referenda that have gone the other way. And of course they say, well, you know, it's very interesting to have people who generally think campaign finance reform is a terrible idea, and that the more money that can be spent in elections, the more we have democracy. But when we talk about these referenda, they say, well, those don't really count. George Soros spent too much money. These were out-of-state agitators. I mean, their faith in the undeviating wisdom of the people as expressed in the referendum suddenly disappears when it comes to marijuana. And it's, of course, a great hypocrisy. And what we are saying in this bill is something very simple. Let the states decide how doctors should practice medicine, because this is not a broad right to use marijuana in general. That's a separate issue. This says we have always allowed the states to regulate the practice of medicine. We should not make an exception because we have an ideological disagreement with how they regulate medicine in this case. It is also, of course, the case that doctors in states are now allowed to prescribe a variety of substances that have much more impact than marijuana, that are much more habit-forming, disorienting, whatever you want to call it. And again, only the cultural, political explanation stands out. So we are again here dealing with this. As you know, this case was brought to the Supreme Court, and some people in the shorthand have said the Supreme Court said, in fairness to the Supreme Court, in this case, what they basically said was it's up to Congress. It wasn't the Supreme Court that said that the states can't do this. The Supreme Court said Congress will decide. And this is one where politicians may not hide behind the court. And no one should argue, well, the Supreme Court has said this is the way it should be. No, what the Supreme Court has said is this is up to Congress. And Congress is fully empowered under the Supreme Court's opinion to let the states do what they want to do. And what we have here are people who have been penalized. We have the notion that we would prosecute people whose crime is trying to alleviate pain is really appalling. And that's what we are here trying to change. I will now call.
This story is not unique to me. I know many people that are using medical marijuana, and they too feel so much better using cannabis instead of the more traditional drugs. You know, the proof is in the pudding. Please help get medical marijuana legal for all sick people. Help get marijuana rescheduled so that this country can do research into the medical benefits of this wonderful plan and catch up with the rest of the world. This is an issue of choice for the sick and disabled. People should be able to choose, with the help of their doctor, which medicines make a difference in the quality of their lives. And if marijuana helps, they need to have safe, legal access to it.
But something just occurred to me, and that is, I'm hoping that I can get my colleagues to understand that this is a model that we're putting forward that they really support. Here's the model. Some doctors and some patients have decided to avail themselves of medicine even though the federal regulators think it's not good for them. And the federal regulators are free to give warnings, and they ought to be free to say, here are the problems. But if people and their doctors decide that this medication is what would be best for them, they ought to be allowed to go forward even if the federal regulators don't like it. And the model I'm describing, of course, is the vote in the House of Representatives to say that people can get medicine from Canada even if the Food and Drug Administration doesn't like it. And it seems to me logically it is, as lawyers say, on all fours with this argument. We have the DEA, we have the FDA. We have a federal regulator saying we don't think you should do this. And what a majority of my colleagues said with regard to prescription drugs in general is, despite what the federal regulators say, we believe that if people and their physicians together decide that this is in their interest, they should be allowed to do it. Now, we were helped by the fact that despite that talking about how dangerous it will be to take these medicines from Canada, no significant number of dead Canadians, as turned out, important to their cause. But it's very similar. Substitute FDA for DEA, referendum in California for the situation in Canada. And I plan to try to use this to persuade more of my colleagues, because the heavy majority voted for us on the prescription drug issue, and I think it's a very similar one.
When you see a group like that rolling in, you're always glad they're not rolling in your town.
Going this way.
All the way down there.
All the different ailments that we all have that none of us asked for. One size does not fit all. Any medication, I mean, completely over the board. It's just that way. If there were something
We're tired
that
of
would
hearing
work and
that.
it was simpler, I don't think any of us would go through all of this to say, you know, we really need cannabis. If it didn't work, it would be so much simpler to say, if something else worked, it would be wonderful. But for some of us, most of us, there isn't.
I'd just like to say, we keep hearing people like Representative Micah say there are other medications available. Well, we've all exhausted those other medications. We found the side effects intolerable. We found the side effects so bad they've taken us away from our families. They've hurt us. They've caused us more problems than the diseases itself. We've exhausted the other remedies, and we need cannabis. We know that works. We know it's safe. We know it's not going to kill us. We know it's not going to throw us for a loop.
We don't want to live our lives on these extremely high doses of medicine to take our pain away. And we don't want to sleep in bed and not be able to get out and enjoy life like the rest of the population does. And this drug, this marijuana, actually helps us to be able to live our lives on a normal level. But we're not so drugged up that we can't get out of bed. We're laying in bed all the time. We can actually function in society like normal people do. And
Yes.
it's so simple. I mean,
Sound order.